Hi, greetings. My name is Mark Grigorian. You're watching another discussion in the series of Future Talks. And a famous Azerbaijani historian, political scientist, Arif Yunusov, is my guest today. He's been in charge of the Department of Conflictology at the Institute of Peace and Democracy for quite a long time. Symbolically, I'm moderating through this interview, not from Yerevan, but from Stepanakert. And it will not be very difficult to understand that we're going to be speaking of the region as a whole, the whole region, and the future that awaits the Armenian and Azerbaijani conflict. Let's start with the following question. Ilham Aliyev said that Karabakh problem is solved. Is it? First of all, hello. My warmest greetings to everyone. This is a good opportunity indeed to discuss the existing problems between the two nations, because I always thought that the most important thing is the dialogue, is the ability to talk about the hardest problems. Now your question, indeed, last year and this year, Ilham Aliyev speaks of a resolution. He means that it's been resolved already. And while he's the president, he also says that there can be no status on no further discussion of the topic. Is that true? Well, we all perfectly understand. These are just nice phrases aimed at or addressed to the foreign communities, because we perfectly understand that. So we're back to 1991, in fact, with Karabakh sovereign region and all the adjacent areas where in Azerbaijan, and Karabakh would go against Baku, and there was Volsky. So I mean, we're back, as people say, to what we started with. And there will be further negotiations, I'm sure, in the framework of the OSCE Minsk group, to discuss the status of Nagorno-Karabakh and the whole region in the future. I have no doubt about that. But the rhetoric we can hear now is closely related to the inner problems of the Azerbaijani society, because for a quarter of a century, the situation in Azerbaijan has been quite difficult. A loss of a territory, a loss of such a region, the need to start the war, return the land, etc. Of course, demands presented to Aliyev: why would you start a war? There's radicalism in the society. And so he's essentially using those by 100% of their effectiveness. So if it was about the need to liberate those lands, now he's doing his PR saying that it is now about restoring the lands that were destroyed through the war, visiting those settlements, especially Shusha, and respectively bringing this up in that era. So Karabakh issue per se does not only persist, but it will still be there on agendas for years. So it's a very complicated situation. There are two statuses. My attitude to the issue as a person who knows both nations in conflict. I want a lot as human. I want peace. I want development. I don't want people to die. But there's also the second part. That's my professional status as a historian, as a person who's been studying conflicts for years. I know the laws of the conflicts, and I understand the situation is quite complicated. When the conflict started in 1988, I knew that we were entrenched into it for several years, but it was Soviet Union at the time. It won several years because the most complicated conflicts start with ethnic differences and religion. And in 94, when the oil contract or agreement was signed, I said, before that, Armenians and Azerbaijanis were the leaders in the conflict. Well, there was an external player, Russia, but it was busy with its issues, and they were not very consistent. I mean, helping Azerbaijan, helping Armenia, not paying attention. But now, yes, one ministry helping Armenians, another ministry helping, yes. Kozyrev was saying some things, Grachov was saying some different things, but it was a period of destruction. Nevertheless, we could deal with the issue on our own, and we were the players, the main players. That was in 94. In 94, though, an agreement was signed about the oil, and the West came into the play, and the European Union and the situation, a new factor that might result in a confrontation between Russia and the West. And Armenia and Azerbaijan essentially turned into subservience. And I said at the time that at least 2 more generations will grow till Karabakh conflict comes to its end, which was at that time I thought was 40 to 50 years. They wouldn't believe. They said that the conflict will be resolved soon. I said it's not possible. The conflict was of significance for Armenians and Azerbaijanis. As for the world history, this is just a common conflict, like if you pay attention to the Palestine or to Kashmir. So we're not even in the middle of that road. Maybe 1/3 was passed already, and there's still a long road to go. So when my one side says that it's better to have the conflict resolved, because for me, both Armenians and Azerbaijanis are very pressure nations. When I was traveling to Tbilisi, I understood that it's a Caucasian country. Georgians are Caucasians. There was a lot in common, but I also felt that there were a lot of differences. When I came to Yerevan, I felt I was in Baku. There are the same Azerbaijanis who talk Armenian. That's what I felt. So the situation was that there was a lot coinciding. As a human, I wanted to have better relations, more peaceful relations, more friendly relations. But as a conflictologist, I understood that we were sinking, and there is still a problem I'm looking at. What is going to happen next? So as a conflictologist, I understand that it won't be fast. Yet in the mid-90s, I started using this term of the first Karabakh war, meaning that there will be the second, the third, and the fourth. So that was the question raised at the time, what to do? So at the time I understood there has to be something done for my own self, at least try. Establish some contacts, hold the dialogue, because the most important thing that happens in Armenian-Azerbaijani relations is the absence of contact and dialogue. So we are of the same generation. We are contemporaries. We lived in the same country. We spoke the same language. Language was Russian, common for both. Now there's a generation of Armenians and Azerbaijanis who speak their native languages, who have not seen one another or seen only through the sniper's aim or machine gun aim. So it's not just another nation, it's the enemy. So there are a lot of myths around. I've even been trying to collect some of those from both sides. And these myths, I mean, they are like chains on our feet. So my issue was to establish dialogue. So I was talking to various journalists in Armenia and Azerbaijan, and when they asked me what to do, I told them just behave naturally, express yourself, protect the interest of Azerbaijan or Armenia, but be able to talk to one another. You should not necessarily agree, but just talk. Okay, as for just talking, there is this quite an interesting rule, I might say, being established now. After the end of the first war in Karabakh, Azerbaijani government started restricting all the possibilities of meeting Armenians. Well, it was not possible to do that in Moscow, in New York, or somewhere else, in London, for example. But as for Baku and Yerevan, they were trying to restrict. And now I have the impression that after the second war, we are now essentially changing the roles. There is more desire to hold the dialogue on the part of Azerbaijan than from Armenia. Armenians are trying to kind of stand away from dialogue. So I don't know, maybe it's a complex of a winner and a loser. No, it's a typical stance in the theory of conflicts. Pay attention to Yugoslavia and Georgia, and it's everywhere. It's a defensive reaction of a loser. So when I follow things happening in Armenia and I check the reaction of colleagues of mine I've been in cooperation for years, I remember myself and my society years ago after the First War, and I understand this very well. We've been through that. Armenians are now going through what we went through since '94. The first 2 years, we did not want any contact from Armenia at all. And even if such contacts occurred, like conferences, for example, or someone organized some visits, there were cases when, I don't know, visits of Armenian journalists happened. Even at the time, I saw the interesting reaction of Azerbaijani society. I did not pay attention to what Armenians thought, but to what Azerbaijanis said. So the reaction was very negative, of course, because it was said like, what negotiations are you talking about when we have a whole army of refugees, so many losses, no talks. We need to show our teeth and then to get ready to bring our lands back. So that's why what happens in Armenia now is a defensive reaction. It's the same we went through, like depression at the time, and distrust and disbelief in the future of the country when the time to restore. The same is happening in the Armenian society now. So essentially, let me tell you this. I always said that Armenians and Azerbaijanis, they're essentially in the vicious circle, the same circle all the time. One country wins, they go into euphoria, victoriously, triumphantly, not thinking of a compromise, but waiting for the other country to show a white flag and capitulate. Now the other country does the same. So I mean, this is this vicious circle turning all the time. I mean, we are the winners now, and we have that attitude. We may magnanimously say that if you agree to our victory, then we will do this and that. That's a state of vicious repetition of the same actions, simply distanced by time. You may remember the Baltic states after the collapse of the Soviet Union. I mean, so unfortunately, Armenian Azerbaijani elites in the past and now are not on that level. In essence, we behave like subservients, showing a quota to the foreign states, but we still think that we're serious. We fight one another, but we understand that there are superpowers abusing us. So once again, one point here. I think that it is the time now to speak of the following. We've said a lot about the losing side, but who won in this war of 44 days in that case? Well, formally it's Azerbaijan. That's formally. I did not say I mean, that we are just marionettes. The same situation was in '94 when I had to meet my Armenian colleagues. I tried to explain. I was trying to say, just understand that this is just a dib, a peg in the game. But this time it was not just a war, but a plan by Lavrov after April 2016. It was this plan that had to replace the Madrid principles by Lavrov. The only difference was that is if Madrid envisaged the international peacekeepers. Now it's Russian peacekeepers. So de facto, this is just a Russian military base. Well, we understand, they say it's 5 years, but we understand that it's going to last for a much longer period. When they ask me who won, I say Russia. Because it's a geopolitical confrontation after 94 between Russia and the West. They will be finding some new roles all through the process. Now, where do Pashinyan and Aliyev go to for a koto? To Russia. Now, some Americans started moving around, but it's not very strong. It's just weak. Yet everything is being decided by Russia, and the main winner is Russia. That's definitely clear to me. So today, Azerbaijan destroyed Armenia by its hands, and tomorrow Armenia will destroy Azerbaijan if Russia wants that. So this is what I wanted to say. Okay, as for Russia, it's clear. What about Turkey? Because Turkey is finally it was part of it. Because it participated in the escalation and in the conflict itself. Well, Turkey is in this region for quite a long time, let me put it this way, at least in Azerbaijan. Now there's this issue of Turkish military bases, etc. But in fact, only 6 years ago, it was a discussion between Aliyev and Erdogan, and it was not a big secret. The other thing is that now the role of Turkey in the region has grown. If you pay attention to that part specifically, you will notice that in fact, it's Russia that used Turkey quite well, given the fears Armenians have to Turkey. I mean, if you really pay attention to what happened ultimately, there is a joint Russian-Turkish peacekeeping center in Agdam, 60 people from both sides. It's just a press center. We understand that it's not that peacekeeping center deciding things in Karabakh, but the peacekeepers from Russia. That center is just to satisfy the needs of Turkey, so that Turks have hope that they are going to play a bigger role there in the Minsk negotiation process. But Russia just abused them. And then they told them, okay, you've done your job, now you can leave. Russia decides everything. Okay, they granted Turks a center that plays no role. It's just a press center. What can 60 Turks in Agdam do to Armenians in Karabakh? Make decisions? Nothing. I mean, of course they can't. They're just tracing things happening there. But the role of Turkey grew in the military sense for Azerbaijan. In that case, maybe we should speak of the role of Israel there. I don't know why we speak of Turkey, but not Israel. Well, in Armenia, we discussed that, but now, recently, previously, you were not discussing the role of Israel, but in the global context, Turkey leads, I might say, compared to Israel, though Israel has done more. I'm not speaking about Pakistan. It's a different thing that Turkey truly played a big role, essentially, with the help of Turkey. Azerbaijan managed to create a new army, one thing that Armenians didn't take account of. So after 94, the Armenian society was simply harvesting the yield of the victory, waiting for Azerbaijan to capitulate. But in fact, there were serious processes going on in Azerbaijan, and they were related to the following. If in the first war, all the officers were trained in Soviet Union, yes, of course, then this time, essentially, in the Second War, it was a war of officers that were trained in Turkey and NATO. In fact, Azerbaijani army simply reproduced actions Turkey carried out in Syria. Even the military generals are young, 40, 45-year-old generals who were trained in Turkey. So it was omitted because Azerbaijan truly established a temporary army, and Israel helped, so to speak, of the role of Turkey. Then that role comes in the military sense in the first place. It's enormous for Azerbaijan. And sorry, yes, there is one more thing here. Right after the end of the First War in 94, and even before, there were talks about Russian peacekeepers. Yet at that time, I also remember that Vafa Guluzadeh, who was the advisor to 3 presidents, actively stood against Russian peacekeepers. And I also remember that since the end of the 90s, Turkey tried to play a more active role in the region in resolving the conflict, or trying to play a more active role in the region in general. Armenia was against Turkey. May we say that being against such a diplomatic influence upon the conflict, we kind of instigated Turkey to more military action or influence? Yes, to a certain extent, I think, because if you look at what happens in Turkey, it was never homogeneous. In the mid-90s, they were trying to be very careful, given their complicated relations with Armenia and Armenians. So they were trying to be very careful. And I remember that Azerbaijan asked for support from Turkey, but Turks were trying to help very carefully, trying to hide, sending some advisors, etc., but they were not actively participating. Turkey hoped that with Ter-Petrosyan, relations would grow better. So the perspective was the following. We should think of relations with Armenia, improvement of relations with Armenia, and Armenian-Turkish relations might influence the Karabakh conflict. That was the stance of Turkey. It did not succeed. After the end of the 90s, Heydar Aliyev changed the course towards a different approach, and Azerbaijan signed a big number of different agreements at the time. So Turkey essentially took the responsibility for everything, almost everything related to Azerbaijani armed forces. They were training their soldiers, providing military support to us. So the position of Turkey started to change. And of course, Erdogan played a personal role in the process. So in that sense, Turkey also gained some benefit. But there's a different point. I still think Turkey perceives itself not in the light of Armenian-Azerbaijani relations, but it perceives itself as a player in regard to Russia and the West, saying that they are on their own in this region. Yes, indeed. There is this rhetoric. Turks might say, and Azerbaijanis, they say we are one nation, 2 states. They say they will not open the borders with Armenia until their issue solved, etc. So it's just rhetoric, In reality, if there are things happening in Armenian and Turkish relations, then Turks would agree. They will not say there is Azerbaijan, because psychology in Turkey is different. They are an empire, and they are the same level as Russia. They pay attention to European Union and United States. They think themselves equal with those supernations. It's for Armenians important. For Turks, past is past. Present is important. They look at their relations as relations in the light with the ones they have with Russia, with the United States, and the European Union. That's the Turkish level. So that's why if Russia has more influence and the West is weaker, then we may make use of this situation. They're also very active in Georgia. Yes, Azerbaijan is their brotherly nation, but if you pay attention to what Turks do, they try to find ways to improve relations with Armenia as well, because there are trade relations. There were, at least. So in fact, it's a different. Yeah, there was a period when Turkey was the fifth foreign economic partner of Armenia. Okay, yeah, so that's why. You know what kind of an issue this is? This is an issue of lost opportunities. There were different situations in the conflict. I try to look at Karabakh conflict as a conflict in the whole region. I always think of lost opportunities, both in terms of Armenian-Azerbaijani relations. Very often, it happened a lot that we were able to solve the conflict. And a lot that happened those days were lost opportunities. Opportunities that, if made use of, could have brought to improvement in relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan, Armenia and Turkey. But it's a dead end to a certain extent today, in the sense that I do not expect a breakthrough in Armenian-Azerbaijani relations on the issue of Karabakh. I think it's yet for our kids to deal with. And there is only one thing I'm looking at now, is when the third war is going to happen. Hopefully not in the nearest future, but it will happen. Well, I think there will be another war. And the same is about Armenian-Turkish relations. So it's a Pandora box. You know, I read Hrant Matevosyan, 94, in a newspaper. He wrote, there will be peace, there will be no peace until Armenians understand the suffering of Turks and Azerbaijanis, and the latter do not understand the suffering of the Armenian nation. There is no such merger. Unfortunately, he was right, and he is right once again. Yes, I want to withdraw, to come back to the earth from geopolitical discourse to what happens here now. So this is the situation. We take it for granted. We think that where Azerbaijanis live, there should be no Armenians, and in villages where Armenians live, there should be no Azerbaijanis. So this whole conversation related to Karabakh and the conflict, and we conquered this many square kilometers and we surrendered this many square kilometers, all of that ultimately faces the simple logic. Azerbaijanis will live here, Armenians will live here, and there has to be a barbed wire in between. And several trenches, several lines of trenches. Is there any other way to look at the situation? In fact, you're right. That's what it is. That's the reality. These attitudes prevail in Armenians and Azerbaijanis. That's the truth. To say that Armenians and Azerbaijanis can coexist as they did before, you know, so many situations, so many mixed marriages. All of that is just looked at as history today. Yes, it used to happen before, but now it's barbed wires between and war. I hope there is no Chinese wall or Mexican wall or Palestine-Israeli wall growing between. But being a pessimist in the sense of quick resolution and further regulation, I'm still an optimist. Well, comparing this conflict to other conflicts, this is what it is. If you draw a comparison to Indian, Pakistani, or Palestine-Israeli conflicts, then there are some positive sides in the Karabakh conflict. First of all, we're part of Council of Europe. It's a different world. It means we have the opportunity to somehow improve our relations in a different manner, because ultimately we appear in a system that changes laws and attitudes a little more In Armenia, definitely in terms of democratization, and a little less in Azerbaijan. But even Azerbaijan, that fails in all the reports of human rights organizations, together with Turkmenistan, etc., even in that case, Azerbaijan remains a part of the European society that undergoes certain influence, and they have to, though Aliyev wants to be an Arab sheikh, but there is a European factor influencing certain actions there. So I think the first positive side is that we're part of the European community, want to be. There is a small chance that at the moment there will be also economic relations. And I even give more attention to that than to people's diplomacy, as they say. But when I'm asked the question about people's diplomacy, I always say, do not exaggerate do not overestimate its capacities. It's just an attempt to arrange a dialogue on the lowest level with a small number of people participating in that dialogue from both sides. There may be more significant influence from economic contact. So the classical example for me is Alsace and Lotharingia. France and Germany killed one another for ages, and cleansing, and not only, but today it's Strasbourg, the center. So maybe Shusha becomes such a center as Strasbourg is today. So that's the situation now. This is the picture. War, frontline, struggle for land on both sides. What if tomorrow we become members of the European Union? Then there will be no borders, the same currency and everything. You know why I'm saying this? Because I've been visiting Corsica and studying the Corsican problem or issue twice. So I've been meeting Corsicans who would wear these hats called the airports, with the mustache and everything. So I mean, but later when I went there, I saw that there were no separatistic no separatism anymore. I mean, no such attitudes. It was something like Soviet Union, I might say, that there's no problem anymore. So I think, what if that happens here on this? I mean, on the lands of the South Caucasus? Because what are we fighting for? We're fighting for the land, not for the lives of the people. This is a war. This is mine and this is yours. So, you know, in a pre-conflict situation, there are lots of colors. After the conflict, we might have occupied the stance of our compatriots. But when the conflict starts, it's just black or white. You're either with us or you're against us. There is this threshold, and that's it. And the longer it lasts, the wider is the rupture. So I think we have to be working with the younger generation more, because there is a new generation growing that grew in an environment of conflict. What if the new generation grows with those perceptions in their heads, how hard it's going to be? So I'm a pessimist in the sense of quick resolution, but I believe that Armenians and Azerbaijanis have more chances to resolve the conflict than Pakistanis with Indians or the others, because we are involved into a number of other projects. Eastern Partnership, for example, we're part of the European territory as well. There's also CIS. So this way or another, it takes place, even now. So you're asking now, saying that after 94, Azerbaijan refused all contacts with Karabakh Armenians. And Karabakh Armenians were out of the agenda. I mean, Karabakh Armenians had an obscure status. they were occupied by Armenia, or it was not clear. It was very interesting for me to know who were Karabakh Armenians for Azerbaijanis. If we say that it's occupied by Armenia, then who are Armenians of Karabakh? Well, you know, years ago, I had an interview with the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan, Aras Azimov. And what did he tell you? He told me, yes, we'll consider them our citizens, but later. Well, you know, I always speak of the role of the elites. So our elites in the past and now did not manage to overcome those complications, to look at the situation in the light of the future. When you say who lost in the war, both Armenians and Azerbaijanis, despite of the fact that this time Azerbaijan won. In terms of perspectives for our nations, we both lost. Because unless Karabakh conflict is fully resolved, we are tied like Siamese twins in a dismal perspective for a long term. So that's why I try to nourish some hopes that something may happen in the framework of the Eastern Partnership, but how? The situation in Armenia is quite complicated. They're looking for traitors, etc. Everything we've been through in our case. And there is a question, will Pashinyan be able to stay? Second, he is an obvious populist. So the person to replace him should not be one. When I remember what he said about Karabakh, I understood that there will be war with that attitude. He simply didn't understand, as Elchibey didn't, by the way. So in conflicts, you should be very discreet and precise and accurate. Moreover, when Pashinyan came to power in the first case when in Azerbaijani society, there was very positive attitude to Armenian politicians. Well, different attitude to Petrosyan. He was not so negatively perceived as Kocharyan. Pashinyan was conceived quite positively. I checked through the situation. They would say Pashinyan is a democratic leader, he fights corruption. His rating was quite high. Even Ilham Aliyev had to somehow react to the attitude of his own people. They had to do something like so. Ilham Aliyev is not Pashinyan. He tries to be the Sultan, and he said that to meet the minister. I mean, he reacted somehow. Pashinyan did something, he tried to react somehow. So in fact, Pashinyan made Ilham Aliyev do something and feel weird because he felt himself quite well with Sargsyan and Kochan. It's his level, the same psychology. Pashinyan is a completely different person. And the attitude to Pashinyan in 2018 was much better than to Ilham Aliyev. This is just a real case. And Pashinyan, in 1 year, managed to spoil everything by his, how can I be soft, incorrect statements, misunderstanding of the complexity of the conflict. So there are situations when politicians do not feel enough responsibility for what they say when they don't, and then there will be bloodshed. And unfortunately, it happened. So it was the first time that an Armenian leader became popular in Azerbaijani society. Yes, a very unique case indeed, very rare. Several questions that our viewers have raised. But in fact, our dialogue went in a way so that you answered all of the questions. I'm looking at the questions now. I understand that we have been conversing all these topics already, both about the participation of Turkey and what Turkey meant, and what the position of the Armenian government is or was, etc., etc. However, there is one question that stands out pertaining to a topic we have not discussed. One is very simple. May there be a coup in Azerbaijan in the upcoming years? Well, rather no than yes. Well, they say a coup, they mean the army, the armed forces. Well, due to Turkey, Azerbaijan has reformed the army, created a new army. Azerbaijani officers, they don't have the spirit, they don't have the heart as the Turks do. Azerbaijani military, they always felt themselves as the elite responsible. In Turkey, I mean, the army feels itself elite, responsible for the future of the nation. Azerbaijanis don't do that. They don't feel that way, even if they are displeased. And that happened, by the way, in 2016. No. And in 2020 as well, part of the military corps were not pleased with what Aliyev did. So, I mean, it's just part of the executive. That's how it's perceived. So to speak of a coup in the sense that we see, as it happened in Latin America or Turkey, it's not serious. The only threat to authorities in Azerbaijan is the economy. Slump in the price for the oil, relations with Russia and the United States, but not a coup by the armed forces. I don't see that possibility. Thank you. And another series of questions, I would say, related to statements by Ilham Aliyev related to Armenia, in fact, already, about Syunik, about Zangezur. It's when Aliyev keeps saying that, kind of teasing the Armenian side, I might even say, teasing that Yerevan is historical Azerbaijani land, and all that truly brings very serious concerns in Yerevan. You know, there is one thing that is never taken into account in the Armenian society, is that in fact, Ilham Aliyev says that when he does not tease Armenian society, he doesn't even think about Armenian society. He plays with his own society, especially those who came from Armenia. It's quite a big group, especially playing a big role. And that thing that Yerevan is part of Azerbaijan, is Azerbaijani town, didn't come after the Second War. That was quite largely discussed. First time that issue was raised by opposition, Ilgar Mamedov, who came from Armenia, and he said that we should not think about Karabakh only, we should also think about returning Yerevan to Azerbaijan. That thesis is quite popular among those who came from Armenia to Azerbaijan, returned. So during the most recent presidential elections, there was quite a difficult situation in the fight between Pashayev with the old team of Aliyev's father, Mehtiev's team. They came from Nakhichevan. So at that time, they needed support from those who came from Armenia. That's why they released Ali and Sanov from prison, and also Ilgar Mamedov related to the latter. And in 2018, they started saying that Yerevan is an Azerbaijani city and they should think about that. So these were messages to their own auditorium. Well, as it is perceived in the Armenian society, they don't even care for. We understood in Azerbaijan who those statements were addressed to. The same's now. Well, of course, when we speaks of Zangezur or Syunik, to like make Armenians angry and show the power of Azerbaijan, etc. But while I know what's the attitude of Azerbaijanis who came from Armenia is, that's the purpose of using such statements. This is more for the internal audience. Okay, clear. By the way, coming back to the topic of Ilham Aliyev and the Armenian society, the issue of the POs, for example, the prisoners of war, quite a painful issue for the Armenian society, isn't it? Well, there is one thing here. Initially, they were just releasing and kind of, exchanging. No significant problems. But Ilham Aliyev is a businessman. He is accustomed to earning on all possible relations, not money specifically, but when he needed something from Americans or the Europeans, or whenever there were pressures, he would immediately go arresting some opposition actors and then telling the Europeans, okay, you do this and I'll release these guys. So when Azerbaijan got the prisoners of war, Armenians, then it was a decision made to turn them into terrorists, announce about that, and then start a trade. So how did Ilham Aliyev appear in Shushi twice? It's clear that he couldn't have taken the new road there because it's still being built and it will take a year or two. I mean, there are no new roads there. No, I mean, the road from the valley, yeah, Fizuli, but there are no roads there yet. Yes, but they started building it. Still building it, but a year and a half is still needed. The second version was a helicopter, but he would not risk because he's not alone at the same time, and there is a big group of journalists that are going to cover everything. Of course, he went through the Red Bazaar, meaning territories under control of Armenians. It's clear that Karabakh Armenians are not simply aware, but they kind of dealing with the security of the president of Azerbaijan. So, I mean, these issues are still there. I do this, and instead you do that. But it's just a trade. So now when I'm told about POs, I know that it's just a trade. Is there, again, I'm sure there have been secret negotiations between Armenians and Azerbaijanis, and there are a lot of things that are not being published, but just life makes them discuss the point. The gas supply, etc., and use of Sarsank reservoir, a lot of economic things. And also roads. So I know very well that Ilham Aliyev traveled through the Red Bazaar, and there was a whole escort of 40 vehicles there. And he was protected by Armenian road police, even. Of course, they knew it was Ilham Aliyev. So there was trade going on. In fact, it's very cynical, though, but it's the truth. It's the truth. Of course, return in change for something else. I don't know, some preferences there. You should take that into account as well. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. My guest today to discuss a very difficult topic, Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict after the second war of Karabakh, was, well, a famous Azerbaijani historian and a political scientist, Arif Yunusov, head of Department of Conflictology at the Institute of Peace and Democracy. So essentially, you've heard a dialogue between two pessimists, people who are concerned, people who are afraid, people who've been dealing with the conflict for over 30 years, and people who understand that till the end of their lives, they will be dealing with the conflict and conflict-related situation. But we both understand that these conflicts and situations are in a way so that we can't survive without one another, ultimately. To build future, we need to deal with one another. I fully agree. All the best. Goodbye.